So you've decided to write a book, but first you need to come up with a plan. Writing a book without planning is like riding a bike without pedals. Sure, it's possible, but it's going to be way more difficult. In this video, I hope I can give you some good pointers and tips on how to write your book. Before I start, I would like to clarify that this is all subjective and it works differently from person to person. After all, this is your book. You can write it the way that works best for you, but I hope this video can help you set you on the right path. Step 1. First, you're going to want to have an idea. Before you do anything else, you need to decide 3 fundamental questions. First, what is your book about? This can be just one big idea or a collection of ideas that come together. From there, you can figure out what genre your book will be, which will help you answer the next 2 questions. Which brings us to question 2. Where is your book? Is it modern day, a futuristic dystopia, or perhaps a medieval fantasy inspired by Scandinavia? This section of your planning will help you with your world building later down the road. Finally, we have question 3. Who is your story about? Some characters work better than others for each genre and story, which is why young adult dystopias seem so overbloated with the teenage protagonists, because those stories work with those characters. Figuring out your characters also helps you decide your themes. Personally, I like to keep track of my own characters in a journal like this, and figuring out my characters' backstories help me decide on the themes of the books as well as the arc that I wanted them to go on. So now that you have those 3 big questions out of the way, you need to start coming up with ideas in the story. I like to start by figuring out my ending first. If your story is structured with the typical 3 acts, like a 3-act play, you'll be planning out Act 3 first. Once you have a few ideas for your ending, you can plan the beginning. That way, you have a point B, and you can use those questions from earlier to create your point A. Just don't get too carried away and expo dump at the beginning, because then you're just going to bore your reader and they won't finish the story. So now that you've got a point A and a point B figured out, how are your characters going to get there? Especially think about what kind of obstacles they'll face. They've got an open road ahead of them. What could go wrong? Does the car break down? Maybe a big storm comes along and blows away the road, so they have to find a new way to their destination. That is what your middle section or your Act 2 is about. Metaphors aside, I'll show you a trick I do when I plan. I like using the sticky note method because it allows me to visualize my story and the journeys that my characters will go through. It looks something like this. Notice these lone sticky notes over here. I was in the middle of planning when I took this picture. Those are the individual ideas that I come up with. Eventually, I can add notes to those ideas, creating a scene, and then that scene turns into a chapter, which I show with each column. Suddenly, I'm able to ask what leads up to that chapter, then what happens as a result of it. And before you know it, you've got 2, 3, 4 chapters that have spawned in just out of one sticky note. Just gonna add a little side note here while I'm editing. If you do the sticky note method, your friends and family might think you're crazy, but they don't understand. There are many other ways to do this though, and it's all up to personal preference. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with just writing your ideas down in a notebook or a document. It's all subjective here. Now that you have the big pillars for your story planned, it's time to get to the nitty-gritty. Here's a list of things that don't necessarily have to be planned, but it isn't a bad idea to decide on these ahead of time, especially when it comes to your writing pace or individual character moments. Some of that stuff will evolve on its own. Feel free to pause if you need to. So this part is kind of optional depending on how you plan the book. If you've already made a detailed enough plan, outlining might not be necessary, because you may have already written one when you planned. But having an outline and a plan is key to writing your book. You're now prepared to start writing. And don't worry if your story deviates from the outline. Sometimes, the story may begin to write itself. So I hope this video helped you when it comes to planning your book. Again, this is your story, so how you plan may be different from how I or anybody else might plan. And you don't need to follow along exactly. But I hope it helped, and thanks for watching.